think we are on. I've sent Mike a message just to double check and see if he was planning on attending, but I mean, we've got quorum, so I think we're good to move along.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome everyone to the spring meeting in 2022 of the Menhaden Management Advisory Committee. Hope everyone had a nice winter break from their activities and is enjoying finally the nice weather of spring. It was a little delayed, but it's welcome for sure. Also wanted to say thanks for flexibility regarding being online. Part of that was to accommodate everyone's schedule, but also because we felt the agenda wasn't overly rich. This way we could save some travel time and make the meeting go a little more efficiently. So I appreciate that. Thanks to VMRC staff and Somers for providing everyone with the agenda with good advance notice, as well as the minutes. Really appreciate that. So I think we will start with the minutes. Speaking of those, I saw some email regarding Monty wanted to raise a clarification on the minutes. So Monty, do you want to go ahead and do that before we move to approve?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing. It was on page 4. I think it was about the 12th line down, where it said that I had commented that the captain knows exactly how many fish goes on their boat or are pumped on board their boat. And that's, I must have been delusional. They don't know exactly what goes on there. We don't know that until we weigh in when they get back to the dock. So I just like to change that knows exactly to approximates how many goes on the boat.
Sounds good. Any objections to that subtle clarification or that editorial change? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes pending or inclusion of Monty's adjustment, his editorial comment there?
So moved. This is AJ Rob.
Thanks, AJ. Second, I'm not a big Robert's Rules person, but we'll follow it. Sounds good. I'll just do it since we can't really see each other. Anybody object to approving the minutes as written with Monty's clarification? Hearing none, sounds good. Minutes are approved. I should have said in the opening remarks, we do have some public represented on the call. There will be time for public comment later on the agenda. The instructions for doing so are here on the screen. I'm fine with general chats being offered if they are germane to the discussion or the topics on the agenda, but please refrain from using those for communication other than with respect to meeting materials or discussion that's ensuing. I'm also fine if folks want to raise their hand and be heard. I will do my best to keep an eye out for hands raised and call on you when we get to that point in the agenda. But please, I'd ask Somers or other VMRC folks to just chime in if I happen to miss someone. The main topic today is kind of related to our discussions at our last meeting, having to do with issues raised at our last meeting with quota transfer from the purse seine bait sector. I think Shanna has put together some slides. If you recall, there was a formation of a subcommittee to kind of address this issue. I'll let Shanna describe how the subcommittee came together and their deliberations. But it sounds like there was some productivity over the wintertime, which is great to hear. And Shanna's going to give us an overview of those discussions and any conclusions that came from those deliberations. So Shanna, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much for putting together your talk, and look forward to hearing what the subcommittee had to say.
Great, thanks, Rob. And just as a heads up, Mike Leonard will be joining us via phone in a bit. So we might have to pause for just a second to make sure to get him set up, but we are in the process of helping him with that right now.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So like Rob said, we formed the subcommittee. I'm going to go over the deliberations of the subcommittee today. The subcommittee met twice over the beginning of this year. I'd like to, just say thank you for those members of MMAC who also joined the subcommittee. I think that it was a very productive group. And I really would just like to thank everybody for coming to the table and having these conversations and being willing to essentially, work together to find a solution to this issue. So just really quickly, we'll kind of recap the issue. I think Rob did a good brief at the beginning of this talk, but essentially back at our last meeting in November of 2021, our purse-seine bait sector discussed the fact that they met their quota in 2021 much earlier than they normally do in the year. At that time, they requested a way to try to provide more quota to that sector to keep it going. As we sort of discussed at that time kind of briefly, our current regulation kind of had a number of barriers within it, language-wise, that prevents that sector from acquiring quota directly. And so what our subcommittee set out to do was to discuss how to get some quota for this sector to relieve some of the issues that they're seeing. There are kind of two paths forward. One, either externally acquiring quota from other states, or another being internally acquiring quota. And we'll speak more on that as we continue. So what you guys see on the screen, I did send this to you folks as this subcommittee formed, is a group of the subcommittee members. A number of us are from the main committee, and there were a number of folks who were at that meeting in November who requested that they also be a part of the subcommittee. So we filled the subcommittee out with a lot of industry representation, some folks from bait, some folks from the induction industry, and kind of talked as a group as to how to tackle some of these issues. And it was actually really great to have everybody in the room together in person and just, talking about some of these problems and how to proceed. So what I'm going to do next is I'll start to go over some of the language barriers that are currently within regulation, which sort of prevent being able to have quota transferred specifically to that purse-seine bait sector. So if you guys remember, and we've talked about this quite a number of times, we have three sectors here in Virginia. We have our reduction sector, we have our purse-seine bait sector, and we have our non-purse-seine bait sector. And so essentially what we have written in regulation right now is that if we, Virginia as a state, request a transfer of Menhaden quota from any other state that's a member of ASMFC, that transfer of quota that comes into Virginia would then be dispersed to all of our total allowable commercial landings. And those total allowable commercial landings are divided into those sector percentages. So essentially, if Virginia acquires any amount of quota from another state, 90% of that approximately would go to the reduction sector, with about 8% or so going to the purse-seine bait sector and 2% going to the non-purse-seine bait sector. So right now, that's how regulation is currently structured if we received an external transfer of quota from another state. So internally, and this is in section 40, this specifically outlines how internal transfers take place. And this specific section only applies to one sector. It applies to the purse-seine Menhaden bait sector. So essentially, the folks that are license holders for this bait sector have an ITQ, an individual transferable quota, and so they can transfer between themselves, between the licensees only, but they can't transfer externally to another sector. So these two sections that we went over are really the language barriers that don't allow a transfer of quota specifically to this purse-seine Menhaden bait sector. So I brought these to our subcommittee, and the subcommittee discussed kind of where they wanted to go, externally. we could put language into regulations that would allow transfers from other states directly to a specific sector. When we talked about this through the subcommittee, there was some discomfort at adding this specifically to regulation while Addendum 1 is in process. You guys remember my super long talk on Addendum 1, which is essentially another reallocation management document. And so there will be impacts of that reallocation directly to our state, and people didn't feel comfortable at this specific time changing the language to allow transfers to a specific sector while we don't know the impacts of Addendum 1. So the subcommittee decided not to move forward with this specific language change. The subcommittee then kind of switched over and started having deliberations to discuss allowing transfers between sectors, specifically the purse seine bait sector and the purse seine reduction sector. Reason being is that these two sectors are well represented, as in the reduction sector is just one entity, and the purse seine bait sector is just two entities. And so these three entities could essentially operate as individual transferable quota holders and transfer between each other. So the subcommittee agreed to pursue this as a mechanism to acquire quota. And the other part of this was some deliberations with the reduction industry, given that the whole point of what we're doing right now is trying to alleviate some of the quota restrictions on specifically the purse seine bait sector. So the reduction industry has agreed to furnish a letter that if any quota transfer this year in 2022 comes to the state of Virginia, they will transfer their portion specifically to the purse seine bait sector. So that 90% of whatever transfer comes into Virginia will go to the purse seine bait sector. So now we're going to get a bit into the language of the regulation. We had some conversations at the subcommittee level regarding this language. I made a number of changes from their recommendations. You guys should have received the regulation in your packet, and we can talk through any of those. This is a draft regulation. It hasn't been sent to our council or gone through our regulatory review committee, so there may be some minor languaging changes before this goes to the commission. So essentially what's happening here is this is a new subsection in section 30, subsection H. And what this does is it establishes a reciprocal temporary transfer quota system between the reduction sector and the purse seine Menhaden bait sector. Now, this is only in play for the year of 2022, unless both this committee and the commission at the end of the year decide that they would like to retain this section of regulation. Reason being is that there is a section of code that specifically says that the commission shall only adopt regulations for the management of Menhaden between the months of October and December, unless the regulatory action is necessary to address an emergency situation pursuant to another portion of code or to ensure compliance with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So we spoke with council. And council advised us that because this is pursuant to the section of code for an emergency regulation, that we would be able to make this modification, but it would need to be sunset for this year, as it falls under being necessary for the protection of the seafood industry, which is part of that code. So we have this written in as something that takes place for the year of 2022. This committee can decide whether or not they'd like to see this continue to move forward. I will say that the subcommittee discussed keeping this as a permanent part of regulation in the future. Reason being is not only does it cover the issue that we're running into currently with the bait sector being unable to acquire more quota, it also happens to help if there's any other sort of emergency situation. So for instance, if there's a large fire at the reduction in the reduction industry, potentially they could go ahead and transfer some of their quota to this sector. Or, for instance, if somebody's boat sinks in the purse seine bait sector, then potentially they could also transfer quota to the reduction sector, just to make sure that there's full utilization of Virginia's quota, and we're working cooperatively together as a fishery on that. So the language that you see in front of you is kind of pieced together from a couple of other regulations that we have for other species. It allows a transfer of quota from the to the purse seine menhaden bait sector from the reduction sector based on each qualified licensee's percentage share of the purse seine menhaden bait sector quota. So what does this mean? Like I said, there's two folks that fish in the purse seine bait sector. These folks have an already established percentage, just like we have amongst our sectors. So when the reduction sector transfers quota to that purse seine bait sector, it will be split based on their already established percent share. The transfer of quota will be authorized only by the commission as long as everybody's reporting requirements are up to date, and as well as the transfer needs to be documented on a form. This is really basic stuff that we do with any of our other ITQ transfers, like striped bass, for instance. You have to fill out a form, it has to be notarized. We need to make sure that everything that we're doing here is lawful. So continuing into this subsection, one of the things that I changed due to some of the subcommittee recommendations was there's now an allowance so that either one of the purse seine menhaden bait holders could potentially transfer quota to the reduction sector if they so choose. Before, we sort of had it in an agreement that the two of them would have to transfer still based off of their percentage. However, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, again, in the case that I mentioned, if there's some sort of emergency, say one of the licensees' boat sinks or something like that, they want to be able to transfer their quota over to the reduction sector if necessary in the case of an emergency. The other parts and stipulations of this subsection essentially outline the fact that this is a temporary transfer. This transfer doesn't continue to roll over from year to year. So when you transfer your quota in 2022, your quota percentage goes back to the same that it was in the following year in 2023. So this is the basic language that you see before you. I want to give everybody a chance to sort of digest everything that I've said. Give me questions, give me concerns, let me know what you've read and if it reads the way that especially those subcommittee members that made some suggestions wanted it to. So I'll pause here.
Great, thank you, Shanna. I see Mike.
To interrupt really quickly. Yes, yeah, I was just going to say, if we wanted to check Mike Leonard's audio.
Yeah.
I see there's a phone number as well, so I don't know if that's him twice.
Here, sorry, I was thinking I could travel and WebEx got the best of me, but I'm here now. So sorry for being late.
All right, sound good.
Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it and welcome. Thanks again, Shanna. That was great. For the committee, are there questions or commentary? If it's not too much trouble, maybe I'll ask you to raise your hands using the feature at the bottom of the screen, and we'll call on you as appropriate. But the floor is open to the committee for comments and questions on Shanna's presentation. Monty.
I was just going to say that I think that is pretty much as we discussed on the subcommittee. So I think Shanna, you captured it the way, I remember it. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Chris Moore? Chris, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, forgot to
Nope.
do the unmute there. I think this is a question for Shanna on this. Thinking about other regulations where we allow the transfers, um, you know, we obviously have two parties that must agree to that before the transfer can happen. Is that similar to other regulations where we allow transfers in the state, or can those transfers be done simply by commission action?
Chris, yeah, that's the way that we're doing these transfers is exactly how we do other transfers within the state. So any ITQ holder, there needs to be both parties in agreement that they are transferring and receiving quota. So the form that we'll design to work through this process will probably be incredibly similar to the ones that we use for something like striped bass. It'll be notarized and signed by all participating parties. So it's going to be almost exactly the same way that we do it for other quota transfers.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anything else, AJ?
Thanks, Rob. And Shanna, thanks for the hard work and the presentation. I didn't really have a question. Maybe it's a comment about the timeline with this. So should this committee, carry a vote and a motion to take this to the full commission and they adopt these changes to the regulation, when would that, at the earliest, what would we be available to go to other states and make a transfer request?
So AJ, the plan would be that this would go before the commission in June. So our commission meeting is next week. So obviously this is not going to go in front of the commission next week. It'll go in June. And so as soon as that regulation is in place, which is usually by the first of the month, then we're kind of good to go. I think you and I kind of talked about the fact that we can start to speak to states a little bit ahead of time, but it should be ready to go by the 1st of July. It would officially be in place.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of have on the record the earliest we're talking about is July 1 to be able to make the formal request. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, AJ. Chris Moore, follow up. Chris, again, check your mute button.
Yep, sorry. AJ raised a good point there, and Shanna, I wanted to maybe clarify. The only way to adopt this regulation is by emergency reg. Is that correct?
So a little bit of let me kind of talk through, there's a difference between the two types of emergency reg. So there's an emergency reg that you put forward that's essentially rushed. There's no public hearing.
Right.
There's nothing, essentially it can kind of be pushed through prior to having anything noticed. This isn't going in that way. So it falls under an emergency reg in code, meaning that we can make modifications to the regulation. It doesn't fall in an emergency reg in terms of timeline. So what we'll do is we'll still have the public hearing process, etc., for this specific regulation next month, instead of it going without public hearing, because if it went without public hearing, you would just have to do it again in the following month anyway for it to be actually solidified in place.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's two different, it's a little confusing. I was sort of confused with it too, because there's one with timeline and then there's one with intent, essentially.
And I'd like to ask one additional question if possible.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So I know you said that Omega has offered a letter saying that they would not request any quota transfer this year, or any part of a quota transfer that would come to Virginia. And obviously, I think the bait industry, I'm sure, is very appreciative of that. Knowing that, though, is that actually enough to satisfy the other states, or being that this is just a 1-year reg anyways and has a sunset in it, would we be better off just putting transfers to bait in the regulation and making it happen that way?
So we've spoken with the other states, and the other states are comfortable with that specific portion of what we're doing, with there being a letter that says this is how their transfer is going to be allocated. Right now, the direct external transfer to the bait sector was not something that the subcommittee could come to consensus on. So this is the most direct route at this time, due to the fact that we don't know what's happening with Addendum 1 for us to get this process moving for 2022.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Ken Schultz.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know if there have been regular or annual quota transfers. And do you expect that, if so, do you expect that to continue this year? Thanks.
Yeah, Ken, so are you referring to quota transfers between states along the coast?
Right.
Yes, yep, that's been a pretty common occurrence, especially in recent times. There's been a number of quota transfers to the New England states due to the fact that they are struggling with a lack of bait with the collapse of the Atlantic herring fishery. So yes, these have been incredibly frequent, especially along recent times. So we do anticipate those continuing for this year, which is one of the reasons.
And they have come to Virginia.
The northern states, the New England states, no. So we've been asked previously at times by some of the New England states. The thing is that both in previously, when this regulation was in code, and now that the regulation is in regulation, there has been a stipulation that Virginia cannot transfer any quota until the end of the season. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that we're a bit unique along the coast in that we further delegate our allocation to other sectors. So Virginia has made a choice to not transfer any quota until the end of their own fishing season to another state. We've done it sometimes previously if there's been overages. Some states have run into instances where there's been overages and Virginia has been able to help. But we don't usually receive requests mid-season because most states know that we are still fishing. So we're sort of unable to project whether or not we're going to use all of our quota until the end of the season.
Right, Shannon. So I guess it's reasonable to expect, or for the bait sector to, our bait sector to expect that they will get some transfer out of this. Is that right?
We hope so, yes. We've already had some discussions with states and we've gotten some favorable feedback. So yes, I'm not guaranteeing anything, but we are in high hopes that that will take place.
Thank you.
Good discussion. Anyone else want to pose a question or a comment? Okay, sounds good. Shanna, help me a little bit. From here, we recommend, or we would draft or make a motion for a recommendation, vote, and then it would go to, and I guess we're in between administrations, but does it go to Pat and then up to the commissioner, or help me on the process, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so Rob, a motion is really unnecessary as long as the committee is comfortable with what's been presented today. How we usually do these things with our other advisory committees is we go to them, we let them know that we've made regulatory changes that have been reviewed by our advisory committee. They recommend that the changes that staff is recommending be moved through the commission. So If the
Okay.
committee is comfortable, these changes with whatever modifications council or regulatory review committee need to make will be presented to the committee, to the commission in June. And at that time, we'll say MMAC is in support of staff recommendation to move this through.
And if any changes, language changes are made, does that need to be circled back to our committee, or?
If they were large, I would circle them back to you. I anticipate that anything that's made will be only to just ensure that the legal sense of what we're doing kind of makes sense. So I'm happy to notify you when that regulation is posted online and flag anything for you guys that is concerning, but I don't anticipate anything actually changing intent of what we're doing here.
Yeah, that's good. I'm fine with that approach. Does anybody on the committee want to comment on that being the process? Maybe I should say if there's any concern, voice that now. Otherwise, if I hear or see no comments, then we'll assume everyone's in support and we can move forward.
Yeah, I think I'm in support as well. It would be nice, even if we don't meet, if there are changes, if the draft language could just be distributed to the group once it goes through that process before it goes to the commission.
Yeah, Chris, I can definitely do that. Those will be posted on, let's see, Monday. Next commission's next week. I think I would anticipate them being posted on May 6th. So I can make sure that as soon as we have a regulatory review committee meeting and council gets a look at these, that final language is sent to this committee, just as an FYI. If anything large happens, I will of course let you guys know. But if we're just making minor tweaks, I'll send it out to you guys and just let you know that it was very minor language changes.
That sounds great. Thank you, Shanna. And I guess we should make a note for revisiting this in our fall meeting to follow up regarding the fact that there is a sunset, and will the subcommittee meet at all over summer to discuss longer range thoughts on how to proceed?
I don't know if that'll be necessary. I think it might be good for us in November to have a meeting, have this as an agenda item regarding how it's been working. So I think at that point, if folks are comfortable with how things have been going, this committee is able to make a recommendation for, it would be a very basic removal of the words in 2022. I tried to keep it I try to keep it an easy change if the committee decided that that's what they wanted to move forward with.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, let's make that note in the minutes to ensure that this is on the agenda for fall.
Can do, for sure.
Great. Thank you, Shanna, and the subcommittee members and everyone who contributed. Sounds very productive, and we've made some progress here, so that's really excellent. Any last remaining items on this topic before we move on to a brief update on Addendum 1? Doesn't seem like there is any, so great. We'll close the book on this one, and Shanna, I guess you get no rest for you. Give us a brief update on Addendum 1.
Yeah, no problem. Hope you guys don't get tired of my voice. This will be a super quick update. I promise it will not be as long as the update I gave you guys a few months ago on Addendum 1. Essentially, Addendum 1 is still in process. So if you'll remember, I believe back in November, I mentioned to you that there might be some changes to the addendum that would take a bit more time for the plan development team to work on. And one of those changes was that the plan development team was recommending that we switch 2020 data for more updated 2021 data. And reason being is that Virginia did put in a proposal that essentially showed that their 2020 landings were impacted by COVID-related closures and issues with market fluctuations. And then several other states also noted that they felt impacts during 2020 due to COVID-related issues. So the plan development team did recommend to the Species Management Board, which met a few weeks ago, that they should replace the 2020 data with 2021 data, as it meets all of the objectives of this new addendum, this new management action, while still making sure that we are not using 2020 data that have clearly been impacted by COVID-related issues. So that did go to the management board a few weeks ago. The management board did vote to replace those data. And so the PDT will essentially go back to the drawing board. We'll have a couple of meetings before the August meeting to replace all of the various options with the new updated 2021 data. And the new timeline looks like this addendum will go to the board for approval of public comment in August. So what the ASMFC and PDT anticipate happening will be that the addendum goes to the board in August. The board should hopefully approve it at that point for public comment, which means that ASMFC will schedule public hearings on this management document sometime in the August through September timeframe. I will make sure to keep both this committee and the subcommittee abreast of those meetings because I anticipate there being final action in October. Like we've talked about previously at length, Addendum 1 could have some impacts on our state allocation or how some of our sectors operate. And so it's incredibly important for us to make sure that our industry is well represented at these public hearings and meetings. So I will make sure to keep you folks kind of apprised of what's going on there. And I'll stop for a second and take any questions that you guys may have about that process.
Great, thank you. Any questions on Addendum 1? So Shanna, was there no impacts noted for 2021 activities?
So not that we can tell right now.
Okay.
2020 data, it was pretty clear, and I will say it was pretty straightforward for Virginia that there were impacts because we have such a consolidated fishery that it's easy for us to reach out and see. Monty was able to provide the number of sea days that they missed and things like that. So the PDT was able to look at the 2020 data and kind of look at their own data internally and say, yeah, there were some anomalies there that folks didn't experience in 2021, thanks to, I think, the sort of release of vaccinations and things like that. Folks weren't tied up to the dock, they were out fishing.
So in the process of using 2021 would be still kind of a fair representation, and therefore any adjustments would be based on perceived normal activities, I guess?
Correct. That was the idea behind all of this. This issue actually has now been elevated to the ASMFC policy board to kind of take into account future use of 2020 data in other management documents outside of just Menhaden. So I think there was a general acknowledgement around the board that we need to pay closer attention to the impacts of COVID, especially in 2021, if we're going to use them for management documents.
Yep, okay. Sounds good, fair enough. Any other questions or comments for Shanna on Addendum 1? Moving very quickly. This is unusual in some respects, but nevertheless welcomed. Doesn't seem like anybody has anything to offer, so that's okay. Shannon, for fall, we will have some degree of finality to this, right? Do you
That is the
foresee-
hope.
Would you foresee needing to put this on the agenda? Is there anything for us to discuss? And if we need to work on that over the summer, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think I do foresee us wanting to discuss this probably, I would assume at about a November meeting, because ASMFC usually meets late October, so I won't have any final decisions until following that meeting. But along the way over the summer, as soon as we schedule public hearings and things, I will be reaching out to this committee and the subcommittee just to inform folks so that they can come if they have interest in hearing more about this addendum and submitting comments to ASMFC directly.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Since we're quasi structuring the fall agenda, remember, just a reminder, if folks want to see additional items added to that agenda, to please provide advance notice so staff or anyone else who might be involved can pull together requisite information and actually have materials available for review prior to the meeting. That's always an open process. We're happy to accommodate the requests of members. Just try to give us some lead time if possible. I think we're good, right, Shanna?
I've got some other business for folks.
Yeah, we do have at least one item under other business, so go ahead, Shanna.
Yep. So just under other business, just again, a reminder, I will keep you guys informed of the Addendum 1 public hearings throughout the summer. The other thing this committee had discussed at prior meetings was the creation of a wanton waste regulation. So I just wanted to give folks a quick update on that. We do have a compilation of some other states' wanton waste laws. That we should be able to sort of not reinvent the wheel here on that. Because this is a broad issue, it doesn't just pertain to the Menhaden fishery. It will require some coordination with our Finfish Management Advisory Committee as well. So I did want to flag that for folks. I will follow up more on this at our next MMAC meeting. We did prioritize having the subcommittee meetings over this regulation, given that we needed to have several meetings for the subcommittee, and FMAC was incredibly busy earlier this year with recreational management measures for summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. So there was really just no more time to shove more meetings in on the docket. But it is something that we are still thinking about, so I just wanted to make sure that folks knew that we were still in the midst of working on that. The other thing I just wanted to kind of put a pin in is at the end of last meeting, you know, Rob brought up this idea of trying to work on an MMAC strategic vision. I think this is something that we should probably revisit in the fall. Hopefully, you know, we'll see. We're starting to get a bit of a jam-packed agenda, but I do think that this is an important topic. So it's something that I just wanted to remind the committee of. That is something that we should definitely talk through at a future meeting. And then the last thing, Rob did a great job of reminding me today that we do have bylaws for this committee. And those bylaws do require us to just discuss reappointments every 2 years. So this is kind of me saying, hey, remember that we've been here for 2 years. If you are still interested in serving, we are happy to have you continue to serve. But I'm just going to give folks some time. You don't need to tell me now. Think it over. And Summers will be sending out the same application materials that we did back in 2020, which feels like about 1 million years ago, just to refresh everyone's reappointments, make sure that everyone still wants to be here, or if you have other obligations and you need to move on, this is a good stopping point for everyone. So just wanted to bring those few things up and happy to take any questions on any of those.
Great, thank you, Shanna. Questions on other business? Ken, and then Chris. Ken, if you're speaking, maybe check your mute button.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem.
Yeah, Shanna, thanks for bringing up the wanton waste regulations or proposals, and I'm sorry we don't have more to discuss on that matter now, but I do hope that when this becomes and I presume it'll be an agenda item in November, that we'll have something really to sink our teeth into, and perhaps maybe even take some action on if staff has some specific recommendations as to how to move forward. I hope that we could get somewhere with that rather than pushing it off another 6 months and so forth.
That's definitely what we're hoping for, Ken. We just had to prioritize things as this committee and FMAC are both two busy committees. So, we had our subcommittee meetings, and then FMAC had quite a number of meetings at the beginning of this year. So we hope that throughout the summer we can come forward with a more drafted regulation for this committee with some recommendations.
Good, thank you.
Yep, good point, Ken, and noted. Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the strategic vision piece here. I do think that's a really good idea, especially considering how many stakeholders are heavily involved in Menhaden. I was wondering though, Shanna, as you said, we've been working for 2 years now, and that's probably one of the first things we should have done is kind of a strategic vision. Is there a possibility of maybe holding a meeting, or maybe it's not a meeting, but maybe it's a work session to work on that strategic vision, maybe late summer, early fall, so maybe we could be close to getting it in place in the fall? Like I said, I do think that is would be a good thing, and I think knowing all the different stakeholders that work on Menhaden in Virginia and have an interest on Menhaden in Virginia, and that we've only been meeting twice a year, having an additional meeting to try to start to flesh that out might be a very good use of our time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll preface this comment by saying Shannon and I really haven't talked much beyond just raising it here under other business to remind ourselves that this was something that was brought up. Given that I brought it up last meeting, I don't want to go through, or my preference would be to not go through some extensive strategic visioning process, but rather just, get together with maybe a subcommittee or reach out to members through various mechanisms to try to identify perhaps priority areas that we want to focus on, put a little structure to our deliberations to make them a little more intentional and perhaps less haphazard or reactionary. The exact strategy there is unclear to me. I certainly would welcome input from folks if they want to, provide comments or thoughts on how best to achieve that. Again, I don't foresee it as a big, long, drawn out pie in the sky process, but more just some attention given to structuring, how we proceed and the things that we may want to focus our attention on.
I appreciate that.
So I guess part of that answer should have included stay tuned. I'll get together with Shanna, over the remainder of spring, early summer, and we'll put our heads together to maybe come up with some proposals on process for that part of it.
I think that sounds good, Rob, and a good way to proceed.
Ken, is your hand raised again, or is that just residual? Fine if it's residual, no worries there.
Sorry.
No problem. I've been on a million of these things, and that happens all the time. So on the reappointment, Shanna, just for clarification, if you recall in the beginning, we were asked to fill out an interest application. Will we be doing that again? If so, will that take place over the summer?
Yeah, that's exactly kind of my intent there. We've dusted off that intent application, and we'll send that back out to folks just to make sure that everybody still has time to commit to this committee. And if this is the time where you're like, nope, I don't have time, it's the perfect kind of placeholder for folks to say, you're going to need to look for someone else to represent this piece of the pie. So yeah, I think we'll just send that back out. Folks can fill it back out, and then you're reappointed again for the next 2 years.
And we're a little bit past that timeline. Is that retro to, well, I guess our first official meeting was April of 20, so I guess it would be retro to now. So yeah, filling out the application to express interest would basically, your term would begin spring 22, I think, right?
Yep, that's how I'd frame it. I think we vary a little bit on months. Sometimes we meet in April, sometimes we meet in May.
Yeah,
so
yeah, sure.
yeah.
Okay, so I think folks should be, be on the lookout for that. Obviously, we welcome your continued appointment, but understand if changes need to be made. We would just request you let us know if you are thinking of rotating off, that you give us some advance notice, because unlike other committees, we may want to be a little bit more, or we have to be a little bit more specific with filling membership to make sure that all sectors are represented appropriately based on the bylaws. So just ask for a little bit of lead time if you're anticipating rotating off there. Any other questions on other business or comments from the committee? Seems like we're good there. So we got at least 3 items for the fall agenda, possibly more as we go through summer. At this point, unless there's objections, I'm happy to open the floor for any public comment. Again, just ask that you raise your hand, or if you just want to offer a chat in the chat box, that's fine too, so long as it's relevant to our discussions from today, or potentially with respect to things we talked about that we may be talking about in fall.
Rob, just so you know, there is also a call-in user, so if you want me to, I can unmute them because they won't be able to raise their hand or chat.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Somers. Yeah, if you're on the phone only, just
I think they have to do *6, possibly,
Okay.
if they would like to unmute themselves to talk. They should be able to do that if they'd like to.
Yep, sounds good.
Otherwise, I see no hands from the public members we have.
Yeah, I don't either. So perhaps quiet on the public front today. That's okay. With no public comment, any last issues or thoughts, concerns before adjournment? Seems like we're good. As always, feel free to reach out to me or Shanna whenever about whatever. I'm happy to hear from you and willing to discuss whatever might be on your mind. It doesn't have to be, strictly speaking, during our meeting times. Stay tuned for the reappointment notifications, and stay tuned for language on the quota transfer as it proceeds through the process. And also, perhaps later in the summer, stay tuned for thoughts that may emerge out of ideas from Shanna and me regarding strategic plan. So with that, I think I'll bring the meeting to a close, and thank you all for your time. I hope everyone's doing well, and that the spring and summer go smoothly for everybody. Look forward to hearing from you or seeing you in the fall. I assume Shanna will seek to be in person for that meeting.
Yes, we should. This one I only held online because it was a shortened agenda, and folks were having some issues with just scheduling. So we'll make sure that we put out a lot of dates in the fall to make sure that we can get folks in person again.
Yeah, that would be good. It's going to be a little bit fuller agenda, so I think that would be nice to be in person.
Agreed.
Okay, hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and we'll talk soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.